Hey, this is a Hakawati production. Hey friends, welcome to the men's room. In light of the demonstrations that have been taking place in Lebanon, we have a very special guest. But before I get to it, I just want to remind you to click subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Like many things, it's a small gesture that means a lot. Our guest is Dr. Rami El Ali, an assistant professor of philosophy and the coordinator of the philosophy program at the Lebanese American University. He's here today to help us gain a better understanding of how Lebanon got to this point. It's being called the October Revolution, and it has the potential to change the course of history in this country and also in the broader Middle East region. Welcome to the men's room, Professor.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
You're busy these days. You're pretty involved with everything that's happening in Lebanon, I take it?
I'm definitely very involved in what's happening both on the floor and on the streets, hopefully for the good of the country.
So there have been protests in Lebanon many, many times before, but this one is quite different. Can you explain how it's unlike anything we've ever seen before for people who are not that familiar with the history of the country?
Yeah, I mean, I should just start by saying that I've only really been deeply involved since my return in 2014, late 2014. I know, of course, that there were protests earlier, and they were big protests, and that's what created this kind of two-sided division. But I do think that the protests that are happening today are much bigger. Well, here's some ways that they're different. They're much, much bigger. They're much more diffuse. So this means that they're not all happening in Beirut. They're happening in places where they traditionally wouldn't happen, like Sur or Tripoli or so many different spots in the country. There's never been the sense that all of Lebanon is protesting. It's not just Beirut protesting. It's not somebody protesting on behalf of others. It's everybody is protesting. So there's the diffuseness, the scope of it, just the size of it. You know, I wasn't in the country when everything started. I arrived on day 5, and on day 5, the number of people who were there was much larger than the largest time I had seen people gather in Talayat Rihetkon in the garbage crisis, which was a couple of years, some years ago. So that's incredible. It was just, mind-blowing to see this many people, still moved something like 5 days down the line. And the fact that, this is continuing. We shut down the country for a week. That's incredible. So that's on the one hand. Here's another way it's different, is that for the first time you see people who are traditionally associated with traditional political groups speaking up against their groups. There's this amazing poster, that somebody was holding in the protests that said, "Baddi Allah bala hizbu," "Baddi al-kitab bala al-kata'ib, baddi amal bala harakat." So everybody was saying they want the values, but they don't want it as it usually comes associated with the hizb. This has never happened before, Everybody has always been killun yani killun, except my dude. So now you're hearing killun yani killun, which yani killun, So that's another way in which it's huge. A third way, I think, is that what really instigated this is that the condition of the people at large has become devastatingly bad. It's just people are unemployed, they're poor, they're frustrated. They've been so morally degraded by this incompetent government that I think at some point it stops becoming about what you believe in. It starts becoming about what do I absolutely need, because otherwise I can't go on as a human being. In the movie Spartacus, there's this is Stanley Kubrick's old movie Spartacus, where they're talking about the slave revolt. And, at some point Spartacus is asked and he says, look, a slave can fight as hard as it can go, because a slave doesn't lose his freedom when he dies. He loses his slavery. So people have a real reason to fight today, because I think that they recognize it's become impossible to not recognize that they're being enslaved by this failed government.
So you're pretty well versed on the recent history. You're also personally involved. You've been a member of the Civil Society Party in Beirut since its inception in 2015, right?
Yes, this is Beirut Medinati.
But explain for those who don't really know Lebanon that well, what's led the country to this kind of watershed moment? Why now?
there's just been an accumulation that has been happening since the end of the Civil War. At some point, you can add one grain of sand, one grain of sand, one grain of sand, and eventually you can break down the ton scale, because at some point, one last grain of sand breaks that scale, right?
Definitely. So let's go over those grains of sand, actually. What are the specific things that have led to this moment as far as you're concerned?
Look, first of all, we still, until today, 30 years later, fail to apply the Lebanese constitution. We're literally in violation of our own constitution. We still haven't applied the Taif agreement, which was supposed to bring some sort of peace to the country. We have continuing electricity cuts, minimally 3 hours.
Wait, let me stop you there. Explain what the Taif agreement is supposed to do for the government. What was supposed to change?
Well, what it was supposed to do, I don't want to go into its details, and I also don't know all of the details myself, all like by heart. But what it was supposed to do is it was an agreement to try and get some sort of stability in the country. So whatever the contents of that agreement are, insofar as we agreed to it, insofar as it was, signed, we have to apply it. Even if we decide that the Taif agreement is no good, we first of all have to apply it, and then we can proceed from there. So the fact that we haven't applied it, that we haven't applied our constitution, means that we are running in a state of illegality, even with respect to ourselves. It's like somebody who's betraying themselves all the time, living in a state of self-betrayal. That's kind of depressing, to think of it in that way. We have repeated apathy and cruelty being displayed towards the poor in the population, okay? Our politicians throw away money wantonly. They talk big at summits and, for lack of a better word, bullshit others about the state of the country, while at the same time, people are getting poorer and poorer and more desperate. And it's fine, if you're suffering, but you're going to really be upset when your kids are suffering and when your grandkids are suffering. In the last few years, we've seen protests with hunger strikes, and we've seen people burn themselves to death in order to get the message across to our politicians, who sit back and can't agree amongst themselves. They're like a bunch of immature, children. That's kind of embarrassing. They've kept up systematic nepotism, theft, and exploitation of all governmental institutions. You can't get anything done in the country. If you need to deal with the government, if you need to renew your passport, you're like, oh my God, what a dread that I have because I have to do this. We failed to apply e-governance and e-banking to ensure mechanisms. We failed to apply both of these things in order to ensure mechanisms of invisible corruption. You have money in a bank in Lebanon, and you know that you can't go to another branch of that same bank and talk to them about your account because they don't know. You can only go to your branch of the bank. So what's happening in between the scenes? Like, where is the money being siphoned to? We don't really know what our government is involved in, There's a lack of transparency, and there's a clear mechanisms being kept in place to ensure corruption, and that corruption is smoothly possible. There's a failure to update the educational system, which means that they're institutionalizing ignorance and, in turn, bigotry in the country. They're making sure that people don't learn anymore and don't understand, and they feel isolated and alienated, so that they can start to be afraid of others. Because when you're ignorant and you see others and you don't know anything about others, you're going to be afraid of them, which makes it much easier to hate them because you have to protect yourself.
How are they doing this?
By not updating the educational system.
You're talking about the public school system?
Yes, but even, like our curriculums are not updated. I'm a philosophy professor, and we still have, in fact, the first year I got here in 2014, I went to this meeting, I think it was held by the UNESCO, and they were talking about philosophy and about the philosophy curriculum. And the takeaway message that these guys tried to give us was that you should be thankful that there is philosophy at all, even though we haven't updated it, and people have been paid to update it, and then they failed to do their job, but nevertheless got paid. We don't even teach philosophy. We teach intellectual history, or what's called the history of ideas, but call it philosophy. Like, we're literally misinforming people about what we're doing. This is just one instance. There's just so many things that are happening. There's continuous siphoning of funds from everywhere and nowhere, whether it's local taxes or international assistance. Even today, when they talk about cooperating, they talk about unlocking packages, that are coming, foreign aid packages. They're abusing other countries as well as abusing their own people.
Can you give an example?
About what? Abusing?
A packet? Yeah, you're talking about foreign packages. What do you mean? Like the
Well,
financial...
there's our government had to agree on something, or our political class had to agree on something in order for us to receive some sort of assistance. I don't remember now the names of these, institutions or the details of them, but, you can look it up in the news. It was recently on there. We have continuously increasing national debt, okay? Like literally billions upon billions of dollars are being spent yearly and being wasted yearly for a country that's never improving and constantly degrading. We're in a constant state of degradation. This is embarrassing. And worst of all, this is causing like moral degradation in the people. People are nasty to each other now, people are rude. They feel enmity with each other. I want to say, this is all before this happened. Today, I don't think that really, if you want to come to a friendly Lebanon, you come to this Lebanon right now, because there's never been a sense where I can talk to anybody at these protests and we can smile at each other, and there's no reason for me to be afraid of her or him, and nor, him or her to be afraid of me. This has never felt that way.
There's this great sense of like oneness,
yes,
and
unity and
common
identity.
Humanity and love, really. It's really incredible. It's overwhelming, really.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that this gets preserved and it doesn't get torn apart by the games that our political class is now going to have to play, in order to maintain its position.
I know you have a list of grains of sand, as we said earlier, but about the games, the political games, the day we're recording this today, there was a scuffle that occurred between the forces of Hezbollah, which suddenly showed up on the scene and kind of stirred up a little trouble. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, they didn't suddenly show up. Nasrallah was, this was a little bit before Nasrallah had the speech, and then a little bit after that. Look, first of all, I think that it's very easy in the country, to just, for many people, the discourse is that, oh, look, Hezbollah is like the scary thing, or there's this division, everything would be fine, if it weren't for them. I don't think this is true. I think Hezbollah's power is partly enabled by the weakness of this government, okay? So first of all, we have to know, that we shouldn't succumb to false dichotomies. We can't say Hezbollah is good or Hezbollah is bad, because we can talk about specific actions. Hezbollah, at one point defended the borders of Lebanon, the territories of Lebanon. Like, look, if you were living in a place that was being invaded and the Lebanese army didn't come to defend you and Hezbollah came to defend you, then you're going to feel your affinity with Hezbollah, and that makes perfect sense. And maybe they were doing the right thing then. And you don't want to say, that everybody's actions are all the time bad or all the time good. You want to say there's specific actions that are good and specific actions that are bad. But now, think about the way this Lebanon has, this country, this Lebanon, or the Lebanon of a few days ago has operated. Anybody who belongs to any religious denomination, and I just want to point out that there's a huge plurality of religions in this country, and this is not, the country didn't form itself. The country was formed by historical forces, largely, external forces, and then these people who belong to different religious denominations, and religious denominations are not insignificant because they give people, the individual, a sense of identity and a sense of belonging. So they have these identities, and now they find themselves, tons of them, from very different identities, and now they're supposed to be collected under this one banner, the Lebanese flag or whatever it is, okay? Well, now you have to kind of engage at something. So look, if I take 5 kids and they all come from different backgrounds and I put them in the same room, I can't just expect them all to play together. I have to set up a game which they can play together in common spaces, teach them how to share with each other. What has this country, what has this government done to make the Sunnis feel like this is their Lebanon, and the Shia feel like this is their Lebanon, and the Christians and the Druze? It's made nobody feel like this is their Lebanon. So then, when you find yourself cohabiting, with others, and you feel like there's no common spaces for you guys to interact or to be friends with each other, and we don't celebrate your identity. We don't have Shia Day, where the Shia, get to celebrate with the facets of their identity and Dirzi Day, Christian Day, and whatever, right? Then people feel like they have to kind of hide amongst their own groups. And sure enough, this is what happens. Every group, lives in its little towns and celebrates its cultural facets, but it doesn't interact with the others. And now, if you at the same time are a very weak state where nobody feels like they're defended, and you get a group like Hezbollah who says, oh, look, Shia people, we're going to be your protectors. We're going to, let you express your identity and so on. If you're a Shia person, you definitely have a very strong motivation to engage with Hezbollah and, to feel friendly towards them. So I think that the violence that happened today, this is part of a culture that has emerged out of a feeling of defensiveness. And I want to point out that although there was violence, there was also an unprecedented unity. We saw Nasrallah's speech spoken in downtown and nobody held a Hezbollah flag. They all held a Lebanese flag. And when the Hezbollah people, walked into downtown, they didn't walk in with a flag because they would have been lynched if they had walked in with a flag. So they did walk in and they did instigate violence, but also you don't want to say that the average guy, on the street, who is instigating violence, they're just being self-protective.
Why did they do that?
Why did they
walk in and instigate violence?
Well, I guess because they feel like, it's not that they feel, it's that Nasrallah explicitly, said, I don't think, we want to collapse this government and so on. And so this makes them feel like, maybe these protesters are now antagonistic. There's also a lot of rumors that go around, rumors like, this is being supported by Western forces. What? By any external forces? Really, that's a joke. Anybody who's been on the ground will have to see that that's a joke because the people are so diverse who are on the ground that there's no way that they're all being funded by any single group or multiple groups. It really looks like they're coming down on their own. It was clear that they were coming down on their own, and it's clear that nobody has gotten any additional funding somehow magically from anybody. Who anyway cares about what's happening in Lebanon? You think anybody cares? We're a tiny little hole. If anybody really wanted to fund anything, they would just fund the war against us and just smash us to bits and just take over. That's what they would do. So yeah, in a way, I don't even want to kind of engage in the discourse of, there was this violence and, there's, now fear or whatever. No, I think that there are misunderstandings that are happening, understandable misunderstandings. And I think that it's our duty right now as the Lebanese people as a whole.
To focus on the unity of
and to people. Also, create this counter discourse where we create these mechanisms of we have a common space in which to interact. There's no problem with you, being Shia or Sunni or whatever you are, you don't have any problems with coexisting. Anybody who's telling you...
It's almost a Gandhi-esque approach, I might say, because it's like facing all the conflicts with a huge amount of love and peace, which is what Gandhi did. And in some ways, that's exactly what's happening here, even in the face of this, this attempt to disrupt in a violent way. It was faced with nonviolence, and it's actually often more effective in the big picture. But let's continue with some of the other issues at play here, because obviously this is a huge one, Hezbollah and the kind of alliances within the government, which we're not going to get too much into. But what are some of the other failures of the state which have led to this moment? Maybe
I should just also say a little bit about the people, because in a way, one of the things that happened is that there was also an element of fear that had held the people post the Civil War. Look, this is very normal. In a way, we kind of display, many of our older generation, many of the people who lived here during the Civil War display symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, They are, in their minds, any small conflict reminds them of the time that there was a big conflict. If at some point you confronted a man and you got into a fight with him and then you were hurt really badly, then the next time you see a man and he acts slightly aggressive, you're going to think, oh no, I'm going to get hurt really badly. This is just a normal human reaction. So people are afraid of any instigation of antagonism because they're afraid of the reemergence of a civil war. So we really do display these kind of psychological, post-traumatic stress disorder. But I think that what has, helped us overcome this, I don't want to say it's overcome, I want to say that what helped us today, overcome it is that, the situation has become so bad that it's very hard to be afraid of the thing that happened in the past when your present is so miserable.
Dire.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of add that. I mean, if you want to just talk about what's happening today, there's been fuel shortages. There was no bread being sold on one of the days.
You're talking about during the protest or
these
prior?
Are just before the protest in the last few weeks, There was, the fires that were met with no response at all from our government because it turns out they're not maintaining the helicopters. But these helicopters have probably gotten some funding to be maintained. Where's this funding gone? You just left the people to burn. And then you throw around conspiracies about, the Syrians or whoever, burning us. Guys, there's global warming happening and you're a country that has refused to even engage minimally in a recycling project. A country, by this I mean a government. Their failures have become so enormously numerous that it's embarrassing. In the last 2 elections, we've had explicit bribery, multiple hundreds of recorded instances by an NGO that's independent from the government, the Lebanese Association for Democratic Elections, and publicized by the local media that there was bribery, that there was cheating, that there was theft of votes. How are we supposed to trust this government? There's nothing for us. And in a way, they were given a chance. They were really handed a chance in the parliamentary elections, and they still failed.
So the people obviously are uniting around these issues. The economy, is failing. There's obviously no approach that's positive towards handling issues related to the environment.
There's a non-project. That's what they are. They're a non-project.
Yeah. They have a long list of non-projects.
Yeah, that's absolutely
But what
true.
are some of the other issues that you think are common amongst all the groups? I mean, you mentioned education, the economy, the environment. We don't have, they don't dispose of garbage properly. There's there's no such thing as recycling. What are some of the other things?
So, I mean, I think that the most common facet that you see today is that everybody has largely woken up to the fact that the sectarian political system is no good. It's not helping them. It's not helping anyone. It's not helping anybody maintain their identity. Everybody has lost their identity rather than anybody gain their identity. And so...
How so?
Well, I mean, we've been applying it since the end of the Civil War, and our situation has only progressively gotten worse.
You're talking about sectarian laws. Which laws specifically are you referring to that are...
The non-application of our constitution and the non-application of the Taif Agreement. Both of these things require that the sects, it's not the religious sects, will remain, and it's going to remain part of Lebanese identity. There's many religions, and that we want to have these religions. After all, anywhere else you would think of this as pluralism, a positive pluralism. We welcome coexistence of multiple identities. But it's one thing for that to exist and another thing for this to be part of the government. It's absurd that I've lived all my life in Beirut and during the municipal elections, I couldn't vote in Beirut because I vote in the Shuf, where my religious denomination is. It's absurd that our government forces you as a baby to have a religion placed on your ID card. That's not acceptable. You commit to a religion when you become 18 or whenever. You don't commit to a religion when you're born, It doesn't pass by blood and certainly doesn't pass by sperm either, which is another thing that they have a real problem with, just the way they systematically abuse women. Basically, this country systematically abuses women in lots of different ways.
Can you give examples?
Okay, well, I mean, so for one thing, even our national anthem is sexist. In it, it says, blah, 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 men bitun lil rijal, men bitun lil rijal. Okay, do men grow on trees? No, they grow out of women. They come out of women, We somehow have this delusional idea that this is, there's just men. And men show up. And it's, people are often, fond of pointing out, that sometimes we say man when we mean human, and that includes women, But sometimes we also do the reverse. We say humanity is violent, when actually we should more appropriately say men are violent. Because if you look at the history of humanity, it's men who have carried out the majority of wars. And it's not a surprise that they would carry out the majority of wars because think about it. Look, a war needs to run on something. And what it runs on is soldiers. And now the question is, how expensive is a soldier? If you're a man, it's very easy for you to think that a soldier is not very expensive because men just show up around you. But if you're a woman, you have much more clear sense of how expensive a man is. Why? Because every man and every woman on earth has had to come out of a woman. A mother has had to carry this child and, for 9 months and then, have it as a baby and then take care of it. And that's how there was a man, hanging around. So really, war is a men's project. And, when we say humanity is warsome, we should more appropriately say men are warsome. This warsome culture that is propagated here, in Lebanon, is being made at here in Lebanon and across the whole world, is being carried by women. Women are paying the price for men's wars.
This is an interesting kind of analysis of how you're saying basically that men don't value life the same way that women do, because it's women that have to go through the process of giving life.
Men don't just grow on trees like our national anthem seems to think.
It's an interesting philosophical approach. But what are some of the actual laws that you're referring to? Because I know that there are some that are contentious.
Yeah, like a woman is not allowed to pass her nationality to her own child. That's absurd. Why?
So, for example, if a Lebanese woman marries a British man, and has a child,
then he's
not Lebanese.
Yeah, or she's not Lebanese.
Or she.
Yeah.
Which is a strange concept.
Yeah, which is absurd. Literally, they must think that
And then, of course, with the legal, there's also issues with the legal courts, with parenting laws. I'm not sure if you can explain a little bit about that.
Indirectly, the country has preserved this sectarian system by making sure that civil marriage doesn't happen. Because in this way, you can make it so that you have to be married under a particular sort of religious law. And very often, these religious laws are not, they don't treat the man and the woman equally. They put the woman below the man, in the rights that she has to ask for divorce, to keep her children, etc., etc. But also this makes sure that the country, will remain divided among sects, because it's very hard to maintain a sectarian system if you're going to be, half my mom's Christian and my dad is Darzi or whatever else. So by doing this, they're also ensuring that they can keep propagating this sort of system. So, that's one thing. There's so many violations. There's also like a lack of educating of the men, making women feel like they have to look like objects, attractive objects to men. This is part of the Lebanese culture. They simultaneously have to look like sexualized objects, but also have to be these pure sexualized objects, because otherwise they turn out to be whores. That's horrible. That's put so much pressure, psychological pressure on so many of them. And you see it manifested in ways that are harmful to both the men and the women in this culture. There's no sexual education. Let's just put it that way. There's also like an incapacity to talk about sexual identities or sexual orientation. It's like somewhere between bistahu, they're like, shy about it, and somewhere and also like tormented about it, so they just become antagonistic.
I'm going to throw out this idea. I think that this is all happening in part due to the fact that there's so much information available now because of technology that young people today are just no longer accepting these old systems because they're aware of what's existing in other parts of the world, which is, people expect to be treated equally and fairly, and they're expecting this for themselves now, and it's just no longer acceptable not to be treated that way. So that's just my take on it. But I want to ask you this last question. As far as you know, as someone who's kind of involved with, local political groups, are there groups in place who can serve as new partners to existing forces like Hezbollah and with those who have alliances in surrounding countries, those that support Lebanon? Are there existing groups in place that would be ready to kind of take over should the current system kind of dissolve?
Yes, I think there's lots of really educated people and really sincere people who don't have to be all that educated, that really have the country's as a whole's interests in place. And they've been, working on positive projects. We saw this in the parliamentary elections. There was the large group Kulna Watani. In Beirut, there was Libaladi. There's just been so many different groups. There's Beirut Medinati as well, which people really shouldn't downplay the fact that we had municipal elections where we ran with a list of people that was half men, half women, which contained people from different socioeconomic classes with different ability conditions. Like this is admirable anywhere on earth, not just on today's earth, not just in Lebanon. So there's really a lot of people who are working and want to work towards a better Lebanon. I mean, for one thing, if for no other reason than that, for many of us, living in this Lebanon has been a very difficult thing to do. And so one way to, kind of pull yourself out of this is to educate yourself and then eventually to leave and then to come back. And as you're pointing out, now the world is so interconnected, so people have new ideas. I think that there's lots of people, who are ready to take over gradually from the current systems. In a way, this is, really interesting to think of this in terms of a generational dispute. In a way, what's happening is that the new generation of Lebanese are having a dispute with the old generation who are much more traditional than we are. And really, in a way, they're just being like clingy babies, They're not being able to understand that, yes, you guys had your time and the civil war was tragic. And maybe they feel like there's a lot of blame against them for having the civil war. But of course, we also understand that there was lots of forces at play during that time, and now they just have to kind of pass the buck to us, and we have to take over.
Pass the torch. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it here. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you, Nadia. I hope that the next time we record this, we'll be in a completely new Lebanon.
It's a pleasure to have you. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this time we spent together. Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you learned something or got inspired in some way. I know I did. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and let us know what you think by leaving a comment here or on our social media at hakawati.fm or themensroom.show. Take care.